The Church of the Eternal Void was an extremist religious organisation formed around 3304 in the Bubble. During the rising tension between the Thargoids and the discovery of the Guardian Tomb worlds out beyond human-controlled space, a number of fringe groups established themselves within the hustle and bustle of human society. Some of these groups, although believing that the destruction of mankind was imminent, were on the whole pacifist in their actions. One exception to this was the Church of the Eternal Void, who in their short time of existence murdered and tormented others who they deemed to be blasphemous of their beliefs. In this video, I will be taking a look at the history of this organisation and looking into their possible connections with a federal government official. In 3304, as tales of attacks from the Thargoid race caressed the ears of federal, imperial and alliance politicians, in the dark corridors and entries were those who were deemed pariah and those of us who were born into a life of poverty, hid away from the rank and file of humanity. A sinister yet familiar tale was about to be born. The whisper of the cult worked its way through the doldrums and slums that were left behind by the excessive wealth of the top of the social food chain. Promising a better way in return for various extreme acts, their whispers organised those who were deemed surplus to requirements into what we'd know today as a religious cult or a terrorist organisation. During their rise, Gethin Okonkwo, an independent journalist, published an article lifting the veil on many of these doomsayer cults, who by this time had attracted thousands of members. One of the most popular beliefs that these cults held was the belief that the Thargoid conflict was a sign of the imminent end of the human race. Amongst this ramshackle group of the misled, one such organisation rose to prominence. They were called the Church of the Eternal Void. This group held the belief that the conflict with the Thargoids was a futile struggle for the souls of humanity. That the Thargoid race were sent to harvest the souls of those of us who were unworthy of salvation, and the Guardian race were beings of light who decreed us unworthy of salvation. It was their belief that humanity's only route for salvation was to prove to their guardian gods that some of us were worthy of salvation, and that through continued worship of the Guardians would any of us be saved. Okonkwo went on in his article to theorise that as long as the uncertainty born through the Thargoid conflict continued, then so shall these cults continue to thrive. Later on in the year of 3304, the Church of the Eternal Void started to denounce a rival group. This organisation that was an affront to their beliefs were known as the Thargod cult. Their existence was deemed by the Church as an affront to their guardian gods, and a holy war was declared on those of us who chose to worship the Thargoids. The following was a statement from a senior religious figure in the Church of the Eternal Void, Cardinal Hieronymus. Due to a rising public phobia towards the Thargoid race, this statement garnered massive support amongst those who seen the Thargoids and this new cult as a threat to humanity. It was the popular yet possibly misguided belief that the Thargods cult members were spies sent from the Thargoid race to commit acts of violence on the ordinary folk of humanity. Despite reminders from local officials and police forces that the Thargoid cult was a legally recognised religion, and they were pacifist in nature, the pews of the Church of the Eternal Void had become swollen with members, and in the coming months, it became apparent that some of this flock would have violent intentions on those they deemed heretical. By the summer of 3304, numerous attacks had been committed on members of the Thargoid cult by members of the Church of the Eternal Void. Some of the most egregious acts of violence during this time was attacks on Thargoid religious centres that claimed the lives of dozens of people and hundreds of injuries. The Thargoid cult, due to its pacifist beliefs, offered no resistance and merely sat by whilst Eternal Void members murdered their families and burned their so-called hive chapels to the ground. Even in some extreme cases, sitting stationary in their places of worship as they burned. The now apparent leader of the Church of the Eternal Void, Cardinal Hieronymus, stated, and I quote, "Our loyal followers are performing the Guardian's righteous work. Those of us who serve the Thargoid demons are demons themselves, and we must cast them out with fire and fury." Despite pleas from local politicians for police forces to crack down on these acts of murder, local security forces were slow to respond, and during this period few meaningful arrests were made. As these acts of violence continued and the death toll began to increase, local political and security was pressured by central authority to enact meaningful intervention against this violence, as pictures of these grotesque attacks were played out on interstellar news networks. Towards the end of the summer of 3304, the Church of the Eternal Void was declared illegal, and their leaders were swept up by federal police snatch squads, who were charged with inciting violence against the Thargoid cult. Local councillor Quindamico declared, and I quote, "All citizens have the freedom to practice any religion they choose, provided that religion does not sanction homicide. Authorities have made the right move to prevent further bloodshed." The news that the Church of the Eternal Void was now a terrorist illegal organisation was not met with universal praise. Juanita Bishop, who attempted to claim a place in federal Congress based on stoking up xenophobia and intolerance in order to claim her place, was critical of the move by federal authorities. She stated, and I quote, "So the sick Thargoid lovers can walk free, while those with the courage to oppose them are put behind bars. It's the traitors who worship the enemy that should be illegal. This perversion of justice will backfire on us, mark my words." It was later thought that Juanita Bishop, after her unsuccessful run in Congress, would account for these words, as they also incited violence against legally sanctioned religious groups. She faded into obscurity, mainly due to investigations into the Thargoid cult coming back, with the revelation that this cult, although somewhat unhinged, was not dangerous and was in fact not working with the Thargoids in any way. As financial backing was pulled from under their feet and the group was declared a terrorist organisation, the Church of the Eternal Void would not continue in the form and size it had become, and faded into the annals of history as the years draw to a close. Now firstly, we see with this group that the Church of the Eternal Void was quick to rise into the position as one of the most expansive fringe groups of this period. Although not the first cult during this time, what was unusual for them was their quick rise to power and certain indirect interactions with sections of the political power base, using them as pawns to stoke up tensions in order to rise into positions of power. Although unconfirmed, it is suspected that this group was started to be equipped with limited arms shipments from unknown sources until central federal government intervened and this group was shut down. Although the central authority of the federal government reacted in a way that essentially shut this cult down, there may have been members of government that had sympathised with this group and their actions. This is shown through Juanita Bishop. If this is true, and Juanita Bishop has a direct connection to the Church of the Eternal Void, and if ever there becomes a time where the galactic community has evidence of this direct collusion, then this would be revealing as to the lengths that certain federal officials are willing to go in order to control elements that they deemed undesirable. Zachary Hudson, in his political career, has been known to stoke up racial, religious and cultural tension in order to enact some new law or to increase his power within Congress. Although I am not stating that Zachary Hudson is in any way connected to the Church of the Eternal Void, I am however stating that certain politicians could hypothetically use extremist groups as proxy organisations with the task of destabilising other groups they deem competitive to the federal government, themselves and their own party. The NMLA, as we know from the other video that I made in relation to them, was using a federal world as a base of operations in acts of violence against imperial assets. They were doing this right under the federal authorities' noses, and when Imperial Security Services zeroed in on NMLA cells in federal space, the initial response of the local government was to continue to harbour these terrorists, even so much to open fire on Imperial security operatives as they attempted arrest. As this conflict opened up into the public, the so-called support for the NMLA was pulled from under their feet and actions were taken to demonstrate to imperial authorities that the federal government was not harbouring NMLA members. These actions, connected with the military-grade organisational skills of the NMLA and their very well-stocked explosive caches, could suggest that certain elements of federal government are willing to use these abhorrent organisations in order to get leverage on the galactic political chessboard. As we have seen before, the Club and their acolytes are willing to commit genocide in order to get their own way, using these types of extremist individuals as a proxy fist, if you will, is well within their MO. One thing is clear with all this: something is going on behind the scenes that we are not yet aware of. And of course, it is my intention to find out what it exactly is. Thank you for the watch. I would like to thank the official members of the channel: David Gate, Ashoka Aslatano, Ministry of Magic Department of Mysteries, Patrick Green, the Wandering Reapers gaming community, and Commander Omega88. I would also like to thank Alex Simming for choosing to back the channel via Ko-fi. If you would like to back the channel in this way and get some exclusive videos, including an extended version of this one, please follow the membership options below or in the homepage of the channel. If you would like to leave a one-off tip to back the channel, then follow the Ko-fi link below. Until next time, Commanders, 07.